It's a story with a headline that you have to read twice because it's so shocking. A mom who allegedly gave birth to her teenage daughter's 14-year-old ex-boyfriend's child. Yeah, it's a lot to take in and comprehend. She's a former school dance chaperone turned alleged sexual predator. And now, Robyn Polston is making a shocking claim in court as prosecutors appear to have a very strong case against her. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. Hey guys, real quick before we begin, if you are looking for a deal on the perfect gift, I want you to see the Meat Chef IQ Sense Smart Meat Thermometer. It is the secret to stress-free, flawless cooking. Whether you're a seasoned chef or someone like me, you're just starting out trying to survive, the Smart Thermometer can guarantee perfect results every time. So no more guessing and no more overcooking. So what you do, you insert the probe. You can see they come like this. You select your food, cooking method, and preferred doneness. Then just relax. Your app alerts you when it's time to flip, remove, or rest. Perfect food every time. From holiday turkey to prime rib, wings, brisket, and salmon. It works for ovens, grills, smokers, fryers, whatever you need. You cannot mess this up. It is the gift that makes cooking stress-free and fun. And with my code OTC, you can save 30% off site-wide at chefiq.com. Well, we cover a lot of shocking cases where you do find yourself asking, how does something allegedly get to this point? This story has stood out like that from the very beginning. And before I get to the new updates in this case about what this mom did in court, let me remind you who Robyn Polston is, the woman at the center of this story. And I'll show you how people in her community, small town in central Illinois, even people who knew her incredibly well, were calling for her to be arrested for months before it finally happened in November. Now, this story played out in Washington, Illinois, city about 3 hours south of Chicago near Peoria, Illinois, town of roughly 16,000 people, so not very big at all. This is the probable cause affidavit that lays out what Polston is accused of doing. And I'll tell you this, buckle up because this is quite the disturbing read. The document says on February 6th of this year, an office took a report about Robyn Polston having just given birth to a baby the month prior. A week later, a detective got a copy of the birth certificate for Robyn's baby. The document had the 43-year-old's name on it, but on the line where the father's name goes, it was blank. So the detective then makes contact with Robyn Polston about a week after and asks, who's the father of her child? Now, Polston reportedly told that officer that the father's name was Brian. He was a man in his 20s, and she hadn't seen him since the birth of the baby boy. The detective then took a DNA sample from Robyn and the baby. Polston was already a mom, by the way. Police say to at least one other child, a teenage girl. And like what so many parents of teenagers do, Polston once chaperoned a dance back in 2023 when her daughter went with a boy. Now, police say after that dance, the boy moved out of the area, but he did return to Tazewell County the next year in April 2024. And then in June of 2024. His family said that he was going there to, quote, visit a friend. The boy then moved to the area officially in August of 2024 to live with the family of his, quote, friend. All of this is according to police. Now, you might be picking up on who the friend is in this case. Police searched the boy's phone and allegedly they found explicit pictures on it. Now, those pictures were allegedly of the mom of his ex-girlfriend, his former dance chaperone, Robyn Polston. Now, we don't know how many exactly were allegedly on the boy's phone, but according to police, the affidavit refers to them as a, quote, large number. That includes images of Polston allegedly sexually assaulting the boy. Again, this is truly sick if true. The police then took a DNA sample from the boy, and that sample allegedly came back showing that the 14-year-old is the father of the baby boy that 40-plus-year-old Robyn Polston gave birth to in January. 43-year-old Robyn Polston was then arrested. She faces 2 counts of criminal sexual assault and 2 counts of child pornography, and we will talk about why those specific charges could be incredibly troubling for Robyn Polston beyond what she's already facing. Court documents allege that Polston sexually assaulted this boy between March of 2024 and the end of May 2024. The other count alleges sexual assaults occurred between March 2024 and February of this year, 2025. Now, on the child pornography charges, documents say that Polston knowingly created the images between March of 2024 and February of this year. Now, according to local media, Robyn has allegedly been enabled by people close to her. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Now, there have been plenty of voices in her community, this small city in central Illinois, who have wanted to see her arrested for what she allegedly did. You know, this is a story that spread through this community long before police got involved. Take a look at this post here. This is by a man who says he used to be a brother-in-law of Robyn, and this was in April. He posted, quote, reposting just because it's absolutely disgusting that Robyn Polston has not been taken into custody yet. If this was a male, it would have been game over from day one. Also, she's still going to her kids' sports events around boys that seem to be the age that she's into. Now, I am forced to take my son to his first baseball game of the season against her son's team. She will be able to sit in the stands and watch all these boys play ball. She should be in jail. She is a predator. Shame on the Illinois state's attorney for letting this drag out for months, especially when there is a physical baby that she had with a 14-year-old. The system is broken. Now, according to 25 News Now in central Illinois, prosecutors allege that Polston had the victim use burner phones under fake names so they could communicate. Not only that, Inside Edition, the TV show, spoke with Polston's in-laws, who say they knew something was wrong when Polston reportedly sent a gender reveal picture to them with the boy in it, who their daughter recognized as a peer from school. In fact, they went and identified him in an 8th grade yearbook. They also have pictures of the victim in the delivery room for the birth of his son, allegedly with Robyn Polston. They also told the outlet that Polston had reached out to her local tanning salon at one point, asking for an appointment so she could look, quote, perfection for the person who she said she was newly dating. Now, as far as court proceedings go, when it came to Polston's bond conditions, prosecutors said that Polston couldn't be trusted to stay away from the victim if she were released. She is still in jail right now. Prosecutors also argued that Polston's mom and sister were, quote, enablers, and they can't be trusted to keep Polston away from the victim. The judge ruled that Polston needs to stay in jail as this case is pending. So that gets us to her most recent court appearance, because she was back in court this month in December. And for as strong as the evidence appears against her, Robyn Polston's pleaded not guilty. She's next expected to be in court in January. It does not appear to this point that cameras have been allowed in the courtroom for her proceedings. Join us now to talk a little bit more about this case is Chris Klotz, civil litigation attorney. Thank you for being with us here on Law and Crime. It's just, every time this story's come up, it's just so difficult to comprehend. I mean, have you ever seen anything like what she's accused of doing?
Yeah, well, so of course I've seen this before, and in my career, it's not uncommon, both in criminal cases that I've seen, also in some of the civil litigation that we do, where our firm Alstock, Witkin, Crease, and Overholtz represents people who are survivors of sexual abuse. We have seen instances where teachers or chaperones or coaches will take advantage of and prey on their, disparate relationship with younger people who are their students or people who are kind of under their tutelage. So not uncommon to see this in what we do all the time.
And it's still because, I know we've seen a lot of cases with, teachers, people who are in positions of power who absolutely prey on young people. The dynamic here, for it to be her teenage daughter's ex-boyfriend, is allegedly the victim in this story. I mean, from just your work and as you've looked at these cases, like, it's kind of like bluntly just saying, like, how does this happen? But it is kind of this thing where it's like there's that, not just a guardian or someone who's an adult, but it's like there's that extra dynamic that this was someone that she knew through her daughter, allegedly.
Yeah, and so this is not an excuse for the conduct at all, because there is zero
Absolutely.
circumstances when this type of conduct is ever acceptable. But what I have found in my practice and doing this, almost 30 years, is there's a very high percentage of perpetrators who are actually survivors or victims of sexual abuse or abuse as children themselves. Again, I want to make clear that's no excuse for this type of conduct at all. But what you see is it's a pattern that's familiar to the perpetrators in many of these instances. And so I think that is a statistic that's been pretty solid over the years, that many times, they have been victims themselves. Again, not excusing the conduct, but it's something that, as parents, I don't know if you have kids or not. I've got two sons. When my sons were growing up, I was, because of what I do, I'm very aware of the fact that there are people out there who place themselves in the path of children through volunteer positions or teaching positions. I actually see this a lot. We represent a bunch of a very large number of people in Florida Department of Juvenile Justice cases where employees have been hired, not vetted well enough. And these employees that get hired, they know that they're going in with troubled youth, who are sometimes not believed because they've been in trouble. And then the predators find avenues to target vulnerable kids. And it's something that's endemic in our society. I wish that we had a solution, but the best preventative is for parents to really be on the watch. And so in this particular case, I don't know if this young man's parents had any idea whatsoever. This case is probably would be, I would think, probably a harder one to kind of detect, because it's not really somebody that's a coach that you can check in on, or a teacher that you can check in, or a youth leader that you can kind of keep an eye on. So these cases are harder probably when it's a familial friendship relationship, actually harder for parents who are being proactive to keep an eye out for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have three girls myself, and I'll say, like, having covered so many of these stories, and like Robyn Polston, she was a chaperone to a dance, and I think she's a hairdresser professionally. She's not a teacher, but we do see, just kind of on the note of like teachers and even any sort of predator that we cover, like the warning signs that are so difficult to detect in so many of these cases. Maybe it's a coach, and then suddenly the coach, they start hanging out after practice or something like that. And in this case, it
Or
was,
often to pick the kid up and give them
yep,
rides to the in just, yeah, exactly what you said.
yeah. Yeah, and it's just that's something that stood out to me, and in this case though, to your point, like here's someone who, like, apparently he had family out of state, and then they had burner phones that they were working, and that just feels also like she, if all of this is true, like really manipulated this boy into believing something. In the work that you do as well when it comes to victims, I mean, how often, in this case, do they realize that they're a victim? What does it take for them to maybe, because on the surface for us from 10,000 feet, we can look and say, like, she absolutely, allegedly sexually assaulted this boy and all of this. But then to see that, he was using burner phones, that he, told family out of town that he was visiting a friend, but it really wasn't a friend. It was allegedly Robyn Polston. Of course, she's innocent until proven guilty. But I mean, what type of work does it take for victims in some cases to understand that they actually are that?
This is a really interesting dynamic. I've done a lot of research on it, because having seen cases before where female teachers have abused male students, whether it's fair or not fair, sometimes the female teachers get treated a little bit differently. If you look statistically, I've done most of my research in Florida on this issue, but if you look statistically speaking, female teachers who are accused of and get convicted of abusing boys, students, um, almost always receive a lighter sentence than adult men teachers who abuse female students. And I don't know that, we can have a discussion that would be a long discussion whether that's fair or not fair, but that's what the statistics bear out. And your question's really important, is that, do the young men who are being victimized by older women who are in a position of authority, who is illegal, age inappropriate, completely unacceptable, are they impacted differently? I think the answer to that is very much no. However, I think, having actually talked with some of the young men who have been abused by women, at the moment that it's happening, I think that there is a sense of thrill, perhaps, a sense of, that it's maybe okay. And I think that that's been glorified through movies like The Graduate and, in our society. I think that, younger men trying to connect on a sexual level with older women has somewhat almost been mainstreamed in a way. And so the boys that are victimized, I think that they are equally traumatized, but they may not realize it in time. And I think that as they grow older, they will see that there is definitely going to be a benefit to getting therapy or counseling, because that type of age inappropriate relationship, which is illegal and not acceptable, actually will have an impact on them. But I think sometimes that young men who are the survivors in that case may not be impacted quite as soon as females, young women. But that's something that needs to be on parents' radar, because I think I have seen cases where before parents have almost been dismissive of a young boy who has had a sexual relationship with an older woman, just say, oh, well, that's just part of, him growing up faster or whatever. I don't think that's true. I think there's trauma for both young men and young women.
Yeah, and in this case, the baby was born at the beginning of 2025, so either January or February, and the arrest didn't happen until early November. And the investigation was ongoing, but there is part of you that wonders if like roles were reversed and you had a 43-year-old man, is that something that police might move a little quicker, even though you obviously need arrest to do it? But it did seem, I mean,
Right.
even people in the community were posting about this story for weeks before the arrest was made.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about this the first time, in fairness, sometimes the DNA tests in different states, it depends on which state you're in. DNA tests can either happen very quickly if you have a very efficient, crime analysis department or a forensic department in a law enforcement agency, or if the law enforcement agency doesn't have the ability to do it in house or has to send it out or has to send it to another state, it can take longer. But I kind of on the same page with you. If this had been an older man, and a young girl had gotten pregnant by an older man in trust, I bet there would have been faster action.
She is facing 2 child pornography charges, and it's believed that there's explicit pictures that will be tied to her, which we'll see how the legal proceedings play out, but she'll likely, I would say, go to prison for a period of time. You have this baby that a young teenager is the father of. In these cases, what happens to the baby after, all the dust will settle with whatever sort of trial plays out?
Sure. Well, usually Child Protective Services will become involved. And frequently, what I have seen in other instances where we have represented families is that, hopefully there's a family member that's qualified or able to take care of the child on either side, and that would be an appropriate, surrogate parent while she is doing her time, if she ends up doing time. um, it varies from case to case, but usually, hopefully, the baby ends up getting placed with a family member somewhere who can take care of the baby.
And then just from, and I know you do a lot of work on the civil side, but some people might look, she had just pleaded not guilty to the charges that
Correct.
she's facing. And there's, a lot of evidence against her that someone would say, like, how could you deny these charges? How could you plead not guilty when, from the bird's eye view, it seems like you're very guilty, allegedly, at this point? Why is it typically do we see those not guilty pleas, even in cases where it seems like prosecutors have very strong cases?
Sure, and that's an easy answer. And I've been in the criminal world before, where I've done criminal representation. 99.9% of the time, when somebody comes to their first appearance or their arraignment, there's always a not guilty plea. So it's kind of standard operating procedure. It's not necessarily a commentary on either. It's not a commentary on the guilt or innocence of the person, as much as it is a procedural point at which the discovery becomes available. So everybody, 99.9% of people who are charged with a serious felony crime, when they go for their initial appearance or their arraignment on an indictment, will always plead not guilty. That triggers the discovery process where both sides swap the information that they have so both sides can learn about the other side's case. So it's kind of a procedural issue. It's not necessarily as much of a comment on innocence or guilt. It's kind of a procedural trigger. And what you'll see, as you know, just from having doing this for a long time, you've seen that only 5% of criminal cases, maybe even less, go to trial. So although everybody enters a not guilty at first in a criminal case on a serious felony charge, then probably 95% of those cases are usually resolved by some type of plea negotiation.
What's typically the strategy for the defense in cases like this when you are facing, I mean, those 2 child pornography charges, it seems pretty clear that prosecutors have the digital evidence to tie her to that. What does the defense do? Because say what you want. I mean, as we all know, everybody deserves a defense. Like, what's the strategy potentially here?
Yeah, 100%. So it, it depends. There's a couple things. If the search, I know there was a search warrant of the young man's phone. A typical criminal defense lawyer is going to make sure that the search warrant was valid and procedurally sound, and make sure that there was no defect in the way that the search warrant was either obtained or implemented. And if there were problems with the way the search warrant was obtained or implemented, then you can do a motion to suppress that evidence potentially. But when you have, like you said, you've got fairly overwhelming evidence in this case. That usually most criminal defense lawyer strategy is going to be one of mitigation. That is where you have overwhelming evidence against you. You don't necessarily want to go to a jury trial, because if you go to a jury trial, you know that if you get convicted, you're probably going to get a much stiffer sentence than you would get if you enter some type of negotiated plea bargain. And so it's usually a case of mitigation. So a defense lawyer in this case will probably try to look at, are there good qualities of the accused? Did this woman have an otherwise exemplary life and this was a slip up? Or versus, are there a whole bunch of prior instances, where this type of stuff has happened and she's actually not a good person who has had a history of doing things like this? So you're going to be mitigating the case and trying to find good qualities that you can say, hey, judge, this was an isolated incident, if it is, and this is something that's never happened before. She's been otherwise a good person. Please show some leniency because she's been otherwise a good person. And a lot of times, it's helpful if the criminal defense lawyer will get their client into counseling. I know that I think that Ms. Polston is incarcerated. In the last time I checked, she had not made a bond yet. That could have changed. But if she gets out, something that a lawyer can do to help also with mitigation is get an opinion from a psychiatrist or psychologist on her likelihood to ever engage in this type of conduct again, because there are psychiatric tests that can test somebody as to whether they have a propensity for inappropriate age relationships.
Yeah.
I don't really want to call it a relationships.
Right.
Inappropriate age offending.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I mean, in these types of cases, and I see it in the comments section. I mean, people are angry. When you look at this type of story, and it's certainly understandably so. She's due back in court in January. The not guilty plea has been entered. A lot more could come of this story. I mean, certainly since it became news, the internet has had, people can search it on Facebook and see a whole bunch of speculation and accusation. But to this point, seems like a very strong case for the prosecution. Chris Klotz, thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. These stories are not easy to talk about, but you really help us kind of get a better sense of how the legal proceedings will go moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and happy to come anytime. Our mission is to help people who are survivors of sexual abuse, and we have a whole team in our firm dedicated to doing that, and always happy to give information and provide background.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.